spent a lot of time in libraries around the country for the last 20 years talking to people just like you about some of their safety and security concerns. Certainly not being in our current environment inside the library is going to be a little bit different than we would be if we were doing business as usual. So I want you to think about some of these things with an eye towards being ready to go back to the library in our new normal here and the patrons that you're dealing with. One of the issues that I face in my work is that oftentimes I only see kind of the difficult or the dark side or the downside of some library patron behavior. I'm not making a value judgment about their behavior. I'm just focusing on how it impacts the business in a negative way. So I hope that makes sense to you. This is not about profiling people or focusing on anything other than how their behavior impacts the library in either a positive or a negative way. My background in HR and security and law enforcement kind of steers me towards the approach to how we do certain subjects. I'd like you to take the tools that you need from the things that we talk about. I have a birth defect. I'm from the East Coast. I talk really fast. So the value of the slides from my perspective is that the slides should be my placeholder for the facts and information and tools and resources that you want to take from our conversation. Sometimes when people look at slides after a presentation and they say, there's one word up there, it says hope or productivity or performance or leadership, and then you can't figure out what the context was. I have tried to define the slides and design them in such a way that when you look at the slides 2 months from now or 3 months from now, you'll have a good understanding of some of the things we talked about. So I'd like you to take whatever notes you want. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Hopefully, if I've done my job correctly, I will be able to answer a lot of your questions. If I don't get to them, feel free to email me or hit me up on Twitter, and I'm certainly happy to talk about anything that's maybe more complex. So I apologize for my appearance today. It's been 12 weeks since I've had a haircut. I'm waiting for my library guy to, or my barber to come back to full productivity out here in Springfield, Missouri. And I think this is the first time I've had a collared shirt on in about 3 months as well. So Mary Beth, let's hit the next one. This is a kind of an off take of an old Alfred Hitchcock quote, the length of a film should be directly related to the endurance of the human bladder. That's my perspective about training programs. So we've got a quick hour today. Hopefully that's enough to cover all the material. Everything that I have said in the slides should be something that you can just simply print out the slides and put into a file folder, maybe look at them in 30 days and come back and see some of the things we've talked about. Especially if you are a supervisor or a manager, you can take some of these things as new employee orientation discussions. You can use some of my slides for staff meeting conversations as well. Thanks. Next one. So one of the things we're talking about is code of conduct, and I'm a big believer in code of conduct that is visible and that you can see from all parts of the library, not just on a clipboard. I like to see the code of conduct in libraries in poster size. I'm really a fan of kind of the larger than life posted on all the walls code of conduct so that patrons can't say, well, you're picking on me or making some kind of claim that we're somehow singling them out when we treat everybody the same. Firm, fair, consistent, reasonable treatment of all patrons that come in. We'll talk about one of my favorite tools, venting and validation. Venting is when we let people vent. They get stuff off their chest. And validation is when we say empathic things like, I hear you, I'm sorry that happened, tell me more about the situation. And my coded language here, see if you can figure this out, stop saying calm down to people who are not calm. We say calm down a lot to people who are not calm in the library world, so you need to calm down. That never works. So take calm down out of your vocabulary. That's a big failure tool that never seems to work. We'll talk a little bit about de-escalation skills, how we can use space and distance with people. I'm a big believer in arm's length plus a little bit more. We have good, what we would call in the library, proxemic barriers. Proxemic barriers are things like desks and counters and carts and half shelves and things like that you can put between yourself and really people that are out of control, mentally ill folks, people that are threatening, that type of thing. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about my favorite sort of top 10 patron behavioral issues, the harassing patron, the entitled patron, you know, the guy that says, I pay your salary, that type of cat. We'll also focus on, Mary Beth, if you can hit that, a lot of other cool stuff as well. There you go. So when we look at the things we're talking about, yeah, go ahead, thanks. The next one is our conversation about the code of conduct. In perhaps days of old, I used to see the code of conduct in a clipboard that was stored under the circulation desk, and I would ask questions of library staff, well, has anybody ever asked you about this? And they say no, and then I say, well, that's interesting. or we see the code of conduct posted on the website and maybe in small print, you have to click on a box to actually read what the behaviors are. I realize that there's a couple ways you can look at the code of conduct. One is that you have sort of maybe a set of quick and dirty, maybe top 7, top 10 type of a thing. That would be kind of the poster size. And Mary Beth, can we go to the next one? This is in a Northern California library, and I really like this. It's on wheels. You can move it around. They put it in different rooms. They put it in the entrance to the library. It's really, the kind of the top 5 or top 4 or 5 things that they think are important in their library anyway. And I certainly agree that the code of conduct itself could be a rich, detailed document of up to, say, 15 pages that has everything under the sun captured in it. But the code of conduct, from my perspective, that people kind of pay attention to, or at least from a patron behavior standpoint, should be something they could look at and kind of hits them between the eyes. Mary Beth, if we could go back one. So we look at the code of conduct, in my perspective, as firm, fair, consistent, assertive, and reasonable application for everybody. And I go back to a simple perspective on how I look at patron behavior in the library. How does it impact the business in a negative way? We get eccentric people in the library, we get interesting people in the library, we get rude people in the library, we get all kinds of folks ranging in age. And really my thing is not what they look like, but just what they do. And does their behavior impact the library in a negative way? That's the things we address with the code of conduct. And so we say firm, we treat people firmly in the application of our policies. We're fair to everybody, regardless of who comes in terms of our understanding of diversity and the folks that we see. We're consistent, and that's really the biggest one of that kind of quoted phrase there, consistency of message. If you run a pretty tight ship on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but then not so good on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, that's when the problem people come in. And so we know this from our experience, that people talk about how they are treated in the library, especially street people, especially people that are experiencing homelessness or folks that have kind of bad intentions in their mind. They go, well, don't go to the library on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday because they really enforce the rules. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, you can do whatever you want. My belief is that every day that we're open, we have a consistent application of our policies, fair to everybody, but consistent. We're assertive in our addressing behaviors that impact the library in a negative way. A guy sleeping in the corner doesn't bother me. A guy's running around the building naked and screaming at people, that bothers me. So I look at behavior on kind of a sliding scale and go, how does it impact the business? And are we being reasonable in our approach? So anything that puts the code of conduct in a visible way for me, posters, this rolling thing that I pointed out, I like that stuff. Let me talk a little bit about the code of conduct from our perspective with our lawyer friends. I oftentimes know that the lawyers for your cities or your counties, your city attorneys, your county council, your district attorneys, your friends of the library or your library board may have legal representatives on it. And oftentimes, and I say this with peace and love in my heart, they don't add value to the code of conduct. They make it more complex than it needs to be. You give them a 10 rules and they come back with 23. So I like an idea that the code of conduct is written in plain English. It's written in a way that everybody can read it and understand it. It doesn't use legal language. It uses human being behavior language, and everybody gets it. Mary Beth, skip ahead 2, thanks. So I go back to what we talked about before. What's the impact on the business? And so whether you're a staff member or you're a supervisor, what is the involvement that we get involved in coming in contact with library patrons? Does their behavior impact our business in a negative way? Again, we have eccentric folks, we have interesting people in the library, we have folks that just want to come in and be left alone. That's all fine. All I'm ever looking at is how do they impact our business in a positive or a negative way. But sometimes, especially from a staff perspective, we can rationalize unacceptable behavior. We will say things like, I hope he leaves before I have to go over there, or I hope she stops doing that before I have to get my boss, or something like that. So sometimes we can create a sense of not wanting to be assertive. And I'm not asking that we run the place like a prison camp, but I do think that sometimes we may need to be a little bit more assertive than we usually are. I wrote in the library security book that most people in the library world are introverts, and they're working oftentimes in an extrovert's job, just like me. I teach training programs. I'm an introvert trapped in an extrovert's profession. I'd like to be a full-time writer. Can't make any money doing that, of course. So I'm an introvert trapped in an extrovert's job. You may have to be extroverted from time to time in terms of how you come and contact people. Are we looking at profiles, or are we looking at behaviors? And the answer is behaviors. We're focusing on what people do. And is our goal in the library peace or justice? And for me, the answer is peace. Justice is kind of rare in this country. Peace is possible, which means we have another boring day at the library. Nothing bad or exciting happened. I didn't have to kick anybody out. No security incidents. Nothing involving the police. That's a good, peaceful day. I think sometimes some employees get concerned about asking for help, that there's a perception in the work culture that asking for help somehow means you can't do your job. We should create an environment for our employees that says asking for help is not a sin. It's something that we may need to do to sort of, and this is the key for me, change the ratios of confrontation. We look at the usual ratio of confrontation between people as one-on-one. Maybe bringing somebody over to kind of watch and see what's going on would be helpful to lower the emotional temperature. And then kind of connected to that, there's a piece that I think about with how we get help, which is based on alignment. And alignment says sometimes we just have a better fit as an employee or as a supervisor with a certain patron based on previous experience or previous contact. Every time I dealt with this person, they seem to get along with me okay, but my colleague not so well, I'll take care of it. Here she comes, every time she deals with me, there turns into an argument. She seems to like you better, you take care of it. So alignment could be based on age or race or gender or previous contact or previous experience, where you just have a better connection than your coworker in terms of helping the patron with their whatever their issues are. So then align with them, do your job with them. If it tends to be better with a supervisor or somebody else, let them step in. We've all had situations in supervisor world where someone comes over and says, I want to speak to your boss, and the supervisor comes over and says the exact same thing you just said, word for word. And you say, why did that person need the boss to come over to answer the same thing I just said? So sometimes somebody wants to speak to an authority figure, and that's okay. So sometimes this idea of alignment is really about who's the best person to have the conversation. We go to a really simple concept in library safety and security, which is do your job or do your job safely. And the answer is do your job safely. I get library folks saying, well, Steve, these two 17-year-old kids that were football players on the high school team got in a fight, and I went over and broke it up. And I said, what'd you do that for? Your job is to be a professional witness and tell people, stop fighting, leave the library, and then call the police if you need to. So I see people sometimes put themselves in situations where they say, well, I had to do my job, and I'm always looking at the criteria of I have to do my job safely first. How do we manage staff fears, especially as a supervisor for certain issues? And I think we share things. We have staff meetings, we have one-on-one conversations, we talk about problematic behavior in such a way that we can address it. It's not kind of a shadow thing. We pull it into the light and say, what are some of our solutions? And I think a message that you need to say as a supervisor, manager, or director is, if I don't know about it, I can't fix it, I can't address it. One of the things that I have seen in my work, which really disturbs me, especially kind of as a recent trend, is the idea that we see sexual harassment, racial harassment of staff by patrons, but it's not spoken about to the supervisors. And so sometimes the staff member will be embarrassed, or they will think somehow it's their fault, or they're embarrassed about not being able to handle it themselves, and they don't tell the supervisor until the behavior is really escalated. So from my perspective, when we talk about problem people, problematic behaviors, we review security incident reports, we start to look for solutions. People feel like I can talk to my boss about negative stuff, I can talk to my boss about things that concern me without fear of consequence. Speaking of consequences, when it comes to our addressing patron behavior, if there are no consequences for their behavior, then it's going to continue. Those of you with dogs and children know what I'm talking about. I got 2 kids and 6 dogs, no consequences for the behavior, there's chaos. So I'm looking at how we can enforce our policies firmly, fairly, and consistently, but there's a sense of sometimes people have to be kicked out of the library, sometimes people have to be kicked out for a longer span of time than just a day, sometimes the police may need to be involved as well. Are we being assertive? Are we using good acting skills? And that goes back to sort of the idea of being an introvert trapped in an extrovert's job. Are we being empathic and patient with our patrons, knowing that we typically can't pick our customers, we get who walks through the door? And I also like the idea of praise as a way to get good behavior out of our patrons, and thanking them for when they do well for us, thanking them when they help each other, thanking them, especially I think about this in the homeless patrons, sometimes their support of us towards other homeless patrons who are having behavior problems can be very useful. And do we give folks praise when they do that stuff? Mary Beth, next one, thanks. So a couple things here. One is, I think we have sometimes a sense of making situations worse when we embarrass patrons in front of their family or their kids or in front of their peers or just in front of the general public. I'm really careful to have certain, what I would call assertive whisper conversations. An assertive whisper conversation says, can we step over here for a second? The card you used to pay these fines didn't go through. Can we find another form of payment? Instead of announcing to the world, your card didn't go through, you must not have any money in your account. Sometimes people do stuff like that just because they're, quote, doing their job, but they sort of forget the idea that we need to help people save face. Everybody's got sort of the rocks that they're all carrying around in their big life backpack. This idea of separating people, of pulling people aside. I do this a lot with kids, with teenagers. We say, let's step over here, let's talk over here. Those of you who work with a teenage environment, those of you who work with young adults and that kind of difficult age of about 12 to 15 years old, they're hypersensitive to being embarrassed, hypersensitive to peer pressure. Let's have a separate conversation so we can kind of help them save face. I'm also thinking a lot about body language and tone. How are we being empathic when we deal with people? Even when you're tired, even when your feet hurt, your back hurt, you want to go home. The idea that they're always watching you, they're always looking at us. Sometimes, you know, they watch us all the time, kind of just seeing what our reaction is to things. Are we being empathic in our interactions with them? My dad's name is Carl with a K, Albrecht, and my dad wrote a huge book in 1985 called Service America. That book sold 1 million copies and really put him on the map as kind of the go-to guy for the concept of customer service. And what he said in that book is every time somebody comes in contact with our business, our employees, it's a moment of truth. When they get out of the car and they walk up to the library building, that's a moment of truth. What do they see in the library parking lot? Does it look safe and inviting and that type of thing? What do they see when they walk in the door? When they log on to our library website, what do they see in the interactive experience with our internet? So there are literally trillions of these moments of truth going on at all times. And do we understand the concept that we're always being sort of judged and given a score in our report card about how these moments of truth are being managed? So over the phone is a moment of truth, face-to-face is a moment of truth, in the parking lot, walking up to the building as they leave, et cetera. These are all moments of truth. So we have a lot of opportunities in our service orientation to them to sort of fix things, correct things, apologize for stuff, make things better, and really maximize those moments of truth. Think about when people have treated you well in a restaurant or a service experience or something over the telephone versus the opposite of that. And you really remember those times where they did not. I'm going to talk about a concept called GREAT in just a second. It's an acronym for service, customer service, but I also want to talk about the last piece up here, which is service blueprints. So for you managers and supervisors, the idea of a service blueprint is let's take something that we screw up, let's take something that we don't do well and fix it. Let's take something like we need to give a patron a refund and we somehow goof that up and it takes 60 days for them to get a check for $1.80. Can we look at the process for how that works and blueprint or map out the steps and figure out what the problem is? When we send it over to accounts payable, it sort of drops off the table, or when it goes over to this person, it dies on their desk. Can we look at things that we do on a regular basis that we don't do well, that irritate the staff and irritate patrons, and can we fix those things with service blueprints? Okay. All right, Beth, let's talk about GREAT. I like this acronym because it's easy to remember. And I know that some of these behaviors are things that staff does anyway, but it's kind of a reminder of some of the things that we really need to do. I'm big on that concept of eye contact, not looking deep into your soul eye contact, but the idea that we pay attention to everybody we come in contact with. I teach robbery prevention for Shell stations in convenience stores around the country. And we talk about, with the clerks, making eye contact with everybody and just giving a sort of a head nod to everybody you come across in your day. You don't have to have a 5-hour conversation, but just seeing people as they come to you and as you walk past. The second one, reassure. Tell them, thanks for coming in. I appreciate your patience while we handle this. Thanks for telling me about the situation. And I apologize for things, even though it's not my fault. I say, I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry we didn't do our job as well as we could have. Let's make sure we get it right this time and tell me what we need to do. And the apologizing thing doesn't mean we're at fault. Sometimes it's their mistake, but sometimes it just sort of checks a box in their head that says, at least I got those horrible people at the library to apologize to me. So I like the reassure piece, which is I'm here to help you. The explain part says, let me step over here and find out what I need to look up here on the computer and I'll come right back to you. Or I need to go over in the back office and pull a piece of paper and I'll come right out with that piece of paper. But sometimes we do things without telling the patron why, and they don't understand whether we've listened to them or that we're actually working on the problem. So we just say, I need to step over and do this, or I need to check my computer or my files, or I'll go speak to my boss or go over to here, I'll come right back. Then the fourth one is we act. We do the thing we're supposed to do within our policies and our skills and our education and training. And then the last one, we thank them, even when they're obnoxious, even when they're rude. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate your patience. Sometimes we're just trying to set kind of a standard of how we do business with everybody, even if they're not reciprocating our good service skills on the one side. So I look at the GREAT model as greet, reassure, explain, act, and thank is something that is kind of memorable and that folks in service business can use. Mary Beth, next one. Is this not true? Does Hobbes not have the best concept here in the history of calming down? Has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down? The answer is no. Stop saying calm down if people are not calm. That's something I learned in my police career pretty early. I have scars all over my body from telling people to calm down. It didn't work. Next one. So here's another model. It's kind of similar to the, it's kind of similar to the GREAT acronym, which is introduce, explain, and ask. And I think about this model in a way where sometimes we get the first part great, but we have to replicate the explain and the ask part more than once. Introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Steve from the library. The reason I came over was I noticed you and your son. Could I ask you and your daughter too? Could I help you with this? I'm sure you know about our policy about this, but could I ask you to do this? So introduce, explain is kind of a low-key model. It's not a confrontational model. Here's the problem with this model. Sometimes you may have to do the explain and the ask part more than once. They just don't hear you. They're just not listening to you. They're caught up in their own little world, their own agenda. They just don't hear you. Now, don't keep introducing yourself. That's crazy talk. But the explain and the ask part, you may have to do more than once. And here's the other tricky part about this. If we go back to the concept of alignment, you may not be the best person. Maybe it's your boss or a coworker or somebody who just has a better connection or better fit with them instead of you. So I like this model because it's low key. Let's compare this model to what the police do. The police have a model called ask, tell, make. Sir, I'm going to ask you to leave the library. Sir, I'm going to tell you to leave the library. Sir, I'm going to make you leave the library. We don't use that model. We use introduce, explain, and ask. I think it's low key. Once you get past the introduction part, and maybe getting their name is useful to us in terms of building some empathy, or if we've got to get their name onto a security incident report, we know who they are. But the explain and ask part may take more than a few cycles for them to actually get it. You know that most folks don't have the greatest listening skills in the whole wide world. Mary Beth, thanks. So a few books I'm going to talk about in our conversation today. I'm a big fan of this book. It came out in the 90s. It's called Verbal Judo. Verbal Judo was written by a guy named George Thompson. He was a professor of rhetoric down in Tampa, Florida. He was also a cop, and he had an interesting sort of way of talking to people. And we kind of go back to some of the things we discussed, which is saving face and allowing them to sort of back out of situations where they don't get embarrassed and things like that. And one of the acronyms he came up with was called LEAPS, and LEAPS really goes through some behaviors that we probably already do, but I just want to remind everybody for the sense of discussion here that we're active when our listening. We make eye contact, maybe we take notes. Taking notes lowers the emotional temperature. It tends to slow people down. I talk, you talk, I talk, sort of slows down the pace. It demonstrates empathy by saying, let me capture what you're saying here. It's kind of important. And that we're empathetic. I see, I understand. You could be right. Tell me more about the situation. And then some people say to me, are you trying to manipulate these people, Steve? And I say, yes. What's your point? I'm trying to manipulate peace. I'm trying to get them to be cooperative. I'm trying to get them to calm down without saying calm down. Sometimes when it comes to empathy, you got to use some acting skills. Then we ask questions. Tell me more about the situation, who and where and when and why and how, not just yes, no questions that we tend to ask in a lot of service orientations. Well, did you fill out the form? Did you send it in to us? Did you do this? Did you do that? Ask more kind of open-ended, extractive questions to get people to tell their story. This buys you a little time to think about your own response, and it maybe helps you come over and change the ratios of confrontation, bring over a boss or a coworker. It buys you a little time. Certainly in the verbal judo concept, paraphrasing really tells the patron that you have heard them and that they say, yes, you're right, that's what I meant, or they can fill in the gaps, but it really points out that you're paying attention. And then the last one is seek solutions that are good for them. We don't always have to have a dog in the fight. Sometimes they say, I'm going to go home and write the mayor. And you go, that's fine, sir. Here's the mayor's address, whatever you happen to do, where they can just sort of seek solutions. And one of the things I tend to do with people in these situations is walk and talk. Let's walk to the entrance. Let's walk over to this area over here. Let's walk back over to my desk. And sometimes when people are side by side, walking and talking as human beings, the emotional temperature tends to be lower. It tends to be less confrontative. A couple things here. Some of the discussion I have in our conversation about safety and security goes back to intuition. And women have much more intuition than men because they're beaten and sexually assaulted and killed much more than men are. And so they're a lot more intuitive about situations. So I really, really focus on, especially when I talk to ladies about their understanding of safety and security, when they say, you know, my intuition says, I wonder if I should get my boss. The answer is get your boss. I wonder if I should call the cops. The answer is call your cops. Don't wait for a supervisor or somebody else to tell you it's okay to do that. One of the greatest books on intuition was written by a guy named Gavin de Becker, And De Becker is the security guard to Oprah and Steve Bezos and everybody who's important or famous. And the book was called The Gift of Fear. And in that book, The Gift of Fear, De Becker talked about intuition. So if your intuition says to you, I wonder if I should go over and do this with a person, then do that. If you say, I wonder if I shouldn't do that, then the answer is probably right. And two examples here. One is sometimes with angry patients, I offer to shake their hand. So, hi, I'm Steve from the library. I put out my hand. Most human beings shake hands. If you don't feel intuitively that you should shake hands with this person because they're acting, mentally ill, that's fine. But if you think shaking hands lowers emotional temperature, then do it. It says, I see you as a human being. This is what people do. Now, in the pandemic world, I'm not sure we're going to still be shaking hands, but you get my point. And the second thing is I ask people to sit down. I'll go over and say, let's sit over here. And I don't have to sit next to them, but we'll sit down. And I got that from my bar bouncer friends. I've never seen somebody fight in a bar sitting down. I've seen lots of fights standing up, but I've never seen anybody sitting down, punch anybody or assault anybody. So sometimes just saying, let's go sit over here and talk like human beings. So the handshake and the sitting down is really about your intuition. And whether you think that's okay to do that, then try it. So what we're talking about for verbal judo, validate, don't justify. Here's some justifying statements. Mary Beth, next one. These are the things that tend to drive people crazy. You need to be quiet. That's not our policy. I can help you. I don't know who can. I'm going on my break. You didn't read the instructions. That's our policy. You wouldn't understand our policy anyway. I don't write the policies. All these things we say that irritate people. The last one's probably the one that drives the patrons the most crazy. Why can't you be reasonable? It suggests they're out of control. And even if they are, when we say stuff like that to them, it really just makes them more nuts. Next one. So if we look at validating phrases, here are my two favorites, and they're in yellow. My favorite phrase of all time, and I use this with kids and with teenagers and folks that are having behavioral problems, is you can't do that if you want to stay here. You can't do that if you want to stay here says, you decide. I'm not kicking you out of the library. I'm not telling you have to leave. I'm just saying you can't do these certain behaviors if you want to stay here. Some guy tries to come inside with a big shopping cart full of trash. You go, we welcome you, but you can't bring that in if you want to come inside. So what we're asking people, especially under stress, to do is make a choice. You decide. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying you can't do these things if you want to stay here. And the last one, this one works really well for kids because they can't prove it to be true or not true, is our insurance won't let you do that. Some kids swinging off of the chandeliers or jumping off the staircase or riding one of the carts like a skateboard. Our insurance won't let you do that. It's a great phrase because they can't prove it's true. So if you look at some of these phrases here, you could be right. I'm not trying to make you mad. Thanks for telling me. Let me get your name and number. Let me jot that down. Some of these phrases are really validating for people. And again, we are trying to manipulate peace. We're trying to manipulate better human conversation. Okay, next one. This is from Fake Library Stats on Twitter. 48% of librarians celebrate Friday night by locking themselves in their bedroom so as to recover from another week of human interaction. I think the number is a little low, actually. So I like Fake Library Stats on Twitter. It's one of my favorite ones. Next one. Mary Beth, if you want to hit them all, just bang them all out there, that'd be great. Let's talk a little bit for some of you folks who work in rural libraries. This may be a one-person library, two-person library. I've typically seen a lot of situations where you're by yourself and you don't feel like you can leave. And there's some thoughts up here about creating a check-in call from either your boss or somebody from far away, that we check on you twice a day with a phone call. Maybe we pay for a security service that covers not just the library building, but the mall next door, the little strip mall. I like cameras. I like a panic alarm, which rings to the PD or the sheriff or to an alarm company. Look at that fourth one. If you're working by yourself, make up the fact that you have a male coworker. Hey, Dave, I'll take care of this patron here. Just let me come right back to you, and I'll see you in just a second, and pretend like you have a fake coworker in the back. Sometimes that can at least plant the seed to a problem person that there may be more than one person here. If you can get permission to have pepper spray, OC pepper spray is really good, not just nearby, but carried actually on your body. Bring your dog to work is a good one, unless you got pugs like me. They're useless as attack dogs, but they're fun to have. Think about how you can create a space for you to park your car right next to the door. Make sure that you hide your keys and your purse, valuables, things like that. Give away anything that you can put into a fake purse or an old cell phone or an old wallet. You can say, here, take this. Person runs out of the room with the fake stuff rather than your real one. And then think about what is the room that you would lock yourself into, a shelter in place, safe room until the cops get there, or you can figure out a safe way to get out of the building. Sometimes people say, next one, Mary Beth, Sometimes people say, well, I have to protect this building. And I say, no, you don't. You have to protect yourself first. So if you want to hit them all, Mary Beth. So if you're working with colleagues, develop some code words, and the code words, bring me the purple file, call Dr. Green, or whatever it happens to be, means go to a safe place and call the PD or the sheriff. Talk about how you handle people that are your frequent flyers that come in that may have behavioral problems, so that you're having a consistent approach amongst everybody. Think about how we use alignment, again, for challenging patrons. Who's the best person to talk or interact with this person? I'm a fan of restraining orders and civil restraining orders for people that are really problematic in their behavior, because that's kind of the ultimate consequence. From a safety and security perspective, I say let's move some displays or move some shelves or get things so we have better sight lines around the library. Do we need walkie-talkie radios to give to staff members so that they can talk to each other across the building, things like that. And then the last one, can we create an ice box? And an ice box is in case of emergency. First aid kit, call out numbers, extra keys or key cards, maps of the facility, stuff like that for the first responders. Okay, Mary Beth? Yeah, let's hit them all. So we talked about intuition. We talked about DeBecker's book. I think, Mary Beth, you put up a link to it. We talked a little bit about space and distance. I'm a big fan of arm's length, especially at an angle. I tend not to stand toe-to-toe with people. Think what that concept means. We went toe-to-toe, face-to-face. It tends to be a kind of an aggressive interaction. I tend to stand at angles to people, not in their face. I tend to use proxemic barriers, desks, counters, things like that for folks that are really upset. We talked about the shaking hands or the sitting down. That's, again, back to an intuitive decision that you make. I also have something called the homeless behavioral triangle of concern. And here we're talking about individuals experiencing homelessness who are mentally ill and actively mentally ill, as in not in touch with reality. They're high on drugs or alcohol at the time of our interaction, and their behavior tends to be predatory. Some mentally ill people have drug and alcohol problems, but they're not predatory. Some people who are mentally ill don't have drug or alcohol issues, but are not predatory. Predatory means they want to hurt people, they're threatening to folks, they steal, stuff like that. If we see those three in combination, mental illness that's active, substance abuse where they're especially drunk or high on stimulant drugs plus predatory actions, those are the type of folks that need the police. I'm a big fan of security incident reports. How do we keep track of those things? And also, how do we capture information for events that happen that we want to talk to about with our political officials and our friends of the library and our library board, so that we have some leverage? And oftentimes you say, well, we need improvements in security, or we need an additional policy language change. And they go, well, how come? And then we have some data, we have some behavioral indicators through the security incident reports. So I like security incident reports for anything that affects theft or violence or threats of violence, anything that's connected to a medical issue or a police response or a paramedic response. And then the last one, how do we work with staff, especially in things like coaching and in staff meetings, to map out solutions for how we deal with certain problematic people? Can we come up with a group solution? Can we come up with some hints and ideas for people about how we deal with stuff that maybe you have a tip that your colleague could benefit from? Mary Beth? So here's my collection. There's probably more than 10, but these are the ones that I can think of most. The harassing patron, stalking patron, entitled or rude, homeless, mentally ill, substance abuse, the tweenager, that's that sort of 12 to 15 range there. The patron who steals, the hygiene challenge patron, and the patron who hogs or misuses the internet. Let me talk about the last one first for just a second. I go around the country and I see probably 4 criteria on how we look at the internet. One is that we have filtering and really strict application of policy by staff. They come in and they address things that they see. At the other end of the spectrum, we have no filtering and no staff intervention. So they say people can do whatever they want on the internet, we don't control it at all. And then there's kind of a middle ground, which is we have filtering with without staff intervention, or we have staff intervention without filtering. So whatever you do, when it comes to filtering or not filtering, I'm just a believer in consistency in terms of how we deal with people who either waste time on the internet and don't let other people on, or bring up inappropriate content, pornography, stuff like that. Mary Beth, let's roll through these. So the harassing patron goes back to a concept, sorry, that I'm concerned about, which is staff is afraid to report these behaviors, we're afraid to report these folks, and we can't address what we don't know about. We usually have really good, at least boilerplate policies about preventing sexual or racial harassment in the workplace, but I want staff to feel that they're empowered and can talk about, at least on a confidential basis, to their boss or to the person in charge or to the director to say, you know, here's what this person's saying or doing, and I need help stopping this. And these are things we need to address as soon as it comes to our attention. And I like the idea of consequences on these types of patrons when they do this. But I've heard library directors say things like, well, you should be flattered by the attention, and he's harmless. He's just, you know, one of our, you know, regular patrons. And that, you know, it's that kind of rationalizing behavior, and I don't care for it. I want consequences for these types of things, and I have an expectation as a staff member this type of stuff doesn't happen. Next one. Here we're looking at a little bit sort of harassment times 10. This is the stalking patron. There may be some mental illness here. There's some bullying. There's some immaturity. It's kind of ironic, ladies. They use your internet in your library to develop information to stalk you. It's kind of ironic how they use the tools that we provide them for this. I'm a believer in not giving any personal information to patrons that we don't know. If you have colleagues that, you know, or people that are friends that, you know, you can talk to, that's certainly another thing. But I don't share information about marital status and dating and things like that with patrons I don't know. These people tend to be really good social engineers. They can come up with a lot of information about you if you just give them a little teeny piece. They go, happy birthday. And you're like, how'd you know it was my birthday? And it's kind of creepy. So the concept of stalking is it's illegal in all 50 states. It is a set of behaviors designed to make people feel fearful. And it's not just sort of aggressive flirting or something like that. It's people that feel threatened by this behavior. This guy shows up at my house. This guy shows up at the grocery store. I see this person bothers me in the parking lot when I'm trying to leave the library at the end of the day. Those are the conversations you need to have with the supervisor, and as necessary, we get involved with the police. I just saw a case that one of my colleagues was working on in California where a guy was arrested for this behavior out in front of a library outside Santa Barbara. And I look at these types of things, and oftentimes these escalate and these behaviors get worse if we don't step in. So people, when they talk to me about this, when I was a detective, I handled a lot of these cases, and as a workplace violence guy, I've handled a lot of them, is the biggest risk to the employee is a previous sexual relationship between the victim and the suspect. If there was not previous sexual contact between these two people, these cases tend not to be violent. But every woman on the planet knows if I can't have you, nobody else can. Those guys are wicked dangerous. Okay, next one. So the entitled or rude patron, I guess we go back to the sense of entitlement. They're dismissive. They don't follow our rules. They don't have a lot of patience. This is sort of a life solution for them. This tends to work with them in lots of places like the bank and the restaurant. And oftentimes it really kind of goes back to low self-esteem, which they sort of mask with this bullying kind of bravado. I think we use praise when they do well. I think we don't hit the tennis ball back and forth with them. We don't argue with them. I think we acknowledge their impatience. I don't think we try to change their mind. And I also think that sometimes they are best handled by this alignment issue, which is there's somebody who comes over who has kind of a better feel for them, a better encounter with them historically. Maybe it's a supervisor. They feel important when they want to talk to somebody. But I think oftentimes they just like being this kind of rude or entitled person because it's sort of how they solve their life problems. But I think what happens sometimes, we can take this personally. So here's what you do. Go to your medicine cabinet and pull out a Q-tip and take it with you and put it on your desk. Q-tip stands for quit taking it personally. Quit taking it personally. It's not about you. They're not angry at you personally. They're upset or they're dismissive of what you represent as a library employee. Quit taking it personally. Next one. Again, here for the homeless patron experiencing homelessness, one of the things that I got from my colleague, Ryan Dowd, and Mary Beth, can we hit the next one? I'll show Brian's book. Ryan Dowd wrote a really cool book for the ALA called Librarian's Guide to Homelessness. It came out in 2018. I like this book a lot. I wish I had read his book before I wrote mine because there's a lot of stuff I should use and I'm putting into the second edition of my book about homelessness. Ryan Dowd runs a homeless shelter outside of Chicago. He's been doing it for about 25 years. Some of you may know him from his videos at homelesslibrary.com. Back up just one, Mary Beth. One of the things I got, if you look at the middle of the slide, from people that experience homelessness is, for the chronic ones, is that they're on the autism spectrum. And oftentimes their autism is undiagnosed and untreated, and we don't sort of recognize it until we start to see them make the same sort of behavioral mistakes over and over again. They tend to be rude and they can't learn social skills. And if you mix that in with substance abuse, especially alcohol and stimulant drugs, Some of them have really pretty serious mental health issues. About 70% of the population has mental health issues and substance abuse issues. The combination of those things really make it difficult for them to be functional, and they sort of have a very cyclical behavior. So Mary Beth, let's skip ahead 2 slides. One of the things I see the best solution in terms of the homeless population in the library is when we work on it kind of as a task force. And if I can bring, in my perfect world as necessary, if I can bring these people in to the environment and say, these are our thought leaders in terms of these types of behaviors. It tends to be police and social services and substance abuse. But look at the bottom too. We can get help from Salvation Army and St. Vincent de Paul and faith-based organizations. We can bring in child or adult protective services. What I typically see success here is when we have these folks come in and have a meeting, and we have come up with a lot of great ideas at the library, and then we don't meet again for a year. So for this process to work with this sort of task force approach to the homeless in the library, it's got to happen more than once a year. And so in my perfect world, we would get these folks together in about a quarterly basis. Police, sheriffs, and PERT leadership. PERT is a psychiatric emergency response team. It's typically social workers that ride around with law enforcement and try to address this type of population. So in my perfect world, we'd get these folks together on a quarterly basis and keep trying to move forward in terms of solutions that have a permanent impact. Okay. Next one. Again, mental illness, my big thing here is we don't touch them or their stuff. We're careful in our discussions with them. They tend to be fearful. This group can be, we oftentimes have difficulty, very complex rules and things like that. We don't touch them or their belongings. We ask them simple questions, simple conversations. There's something down at the bottom there called the 3-type criteria. The 3-type criteria says if they are a danger to themselves, if they're a danger to somebody else, or they're gravely disabled, meaning unable to care for themselves, we call the cops. So some people don't necessarily meet the 3-type criteria. It only has to be one of the 3. Danger to themselves means that they're suicidal. Danger to other people means they're violent. And gravely disabled means they can't care for themselves. They would get harmed if they walked out into the street and got hit by a car or something like that. So I think we need to pay attention to when we call the police for those people to meet that 3-type criteria. And again, think about how we can do things that are pretty creative now, where we're asking social workers to come to the library and actually do the work in our library population. Next one. So certainly if we read the news around library world in this country, the biggest issue for us when it comes to substance abuse is the opiate drug problem. And as we look at certain parts of the population, opiate drug use is pretty prevalent, not so much in other places. I was teaching a program in Northern California a couple years ago. I was on the 2nd floor doing my session. We hear sirens, we go downstairs, woman overdoses on drugs in the restroom of the library. So I mean, I can't get away from it. They follow me around the country. So we look at opiate drug use. Now we're seeing libraries that are doing training for some of the staff, voluntary training about Narcan, which is the nasal spray that people are given when they're under the overdose situation here. So again, I think about the substance abusing patron. We remind staff to look for a medical issue with these people. Sometimes it's a behavioral concern. Typically with alcohol, it's kind of a behavioral thing. But are we seeing people that are in jeopardy of overdosing? They have what's called opiate narcosis. They're about ready to pass out. And does that become a paramedic issue? So we remind staff not just the stimulant drug use, which makes people erratic, or alcohol use, which makes them erratic, but often do we see a medical concern here with this population? And we may have to call the paramedics for certain types of behavior, which we think is sleeping, but is actually drug overdose. So when we look at people and kind of assess them from a medical perspective, think about the fact that paramedics, if they show up to somebody who's below the age of 30 and they're passed out, they will give them Narcan as soon as they get there because they anticipate it's going to be a drug issue instead of, you know, an old 57-year-old guy like me who's probably have cardiac concerns. So think about for staff, does this look like a medical concern as opposed to a behavioral issue? Next one. So you can see this young lady here, Northern California Library, that's opiate narcosis. Her hands and feet are blue. She has cyanotic, she needs paramedics. And that's the type of thing I'm concerned about with staff, that we see this as not as a sleeping issue, but as a medical concern. Next one. The Tweenage Patron, again, we have a pretty rough combination of peer pressure and hormones and puberty and immaturity all rolled into one tight package. I remember my daughter when she was, 15, had, hair from out, 10 feet high and makeup caked on. And my daughter's 27 and she says, "Why did you let me leave the house like that?" I said, "Let you leave the house like that? We begged you not to go out like that." Um, so that population from about 12 to 15 can be really difficult. I like the, young adult and children's librarians tend to have really good tips on how to help the rest of us. But I guess the biggest one for me is my two phrases. Again, you can't do that if you want to stay here down at the bottom, or our insurance won't let you do that. Who's the best person to use the introduce, explain, and ask concept? And also, when we think about this population, peer pressure is really big. Separate. Can I talk to you for a second? Could we step over here for a second, get them away from their peers and talk to them about what you want them to do? Having that conversation in front of a group tends to be really difficult. Next one. So one of the things that people who steal from the library tend to do is they will look at the thing that they want to steal. So you have some type of charity jar up on the counter. We're putting it in for veterans or something, and there's, $100 worth of nickels, dimes, quarters, and dollars in there. The person will walk by and look at it 5 or 6 times. I see this on video all the time. And so you can interrupt that by just reminding them that you're there. You can interrupt that by moving the charity jar. You can interrupt that by going over and talking to them, because sometimes they get sort of focused or fixated on what they want to steal. We see this when they walk by cell phones and things that are on desks, counters, backpacks, purses, laptops. I think also we have to do 2 things. One is remind patrons that we are not there to see everything. And so when their stuff gets stolen, they're really angry and they go, why didn't you pay attention? And you go, I can't be everywhere. And you have to say to patrons, I just can't see everything. Just like we ask you to take care of your kids, you got to take care of your stuff. You got to bring it with you when you go. I also think, and this is important here, that we make reports to the police for petty theft. People steal DVDs or something like that, and you go, the cops are not going to come out for this. Well, make the report anyway, even if it's over the phone. What we want to say to people is every time you steal from the library, there are consequences. The cops may not get our stuff back, but maybe they might. Who knows? It's possible. But I want us to make police reports. And sometimes when I go to the library, I say, how's the book alarm system work here? And they go, it's great. We unplugged it 2 years ago. And I go, how come? And they go, because it kept going off too often. So if stuff gets stolen, I want consequences, because I can tell you the people on the street talk and they go, boy, if you steal from the library, they call the cops, as opposed to you can steal whatever you want from the library, books, DVDs, equipment, whatever, and they aren't going to call the cops. That's not the message we want. Next one. This is a tough one. This could be connected to homelessness or mental illness. It could be depression. It could be medication. It could be religious beliefs. There's a lot of stuff. The one I oftentimes see is the revenge one, which is I'm going to do this to make other people know that I can sort of impact them in a negative way. I think we need to have what's called our social workers and therapists call a care-fronting conversation. We care enough to confront the issue. We do it in a confidential way. We don't make value judgments. We just say, is there anything I can help you with? Especially we anticipate this person's experiencing homelessness, but sometimes people just do this stuff because we need to set kind of a behavioral boundary for them and say, you got to come in clean, you got to come in with clean clothes. There's a lot of reasons for this. Sometimes revenge, sometimes medication, sometimes depression, sometimes there's some sort of hidden rules. This is a tough one, but if you're a library supervisor, you probably had to have this conversation at least once in your career. Next one. So this is the last one. So again, we go back to what's your code of conduct, and do we have filtering versus staff intervention? Some staffs filter and they're pretty intense in their interventions. Other staffs no intervention and no filtering. The biggest thing for me is I really get bothered by males who you look at pornography as a way to sort of bother other people, or to be provocative, or to frighten folks in the library, or to do it to make people feel uncomfortable. I think we have to step in and really hammer these folks in terms of their behavior. Especially we look at things related to child pornography, which is a significant concern. The cop's going to come in and seize that computer if they get these types of reports. So, what are we looking at here? Is it immaturity? Is it they like to be sort of antagonistic to people? Who are we dealing with, and how do we enforce our policies in a firm, fair, and a consistent way? Next one. So let's talk about the cops for a second. In my perfect world, the police, especially those of you that work in an environment where the police can come by, and you're not in a rural location where they're 2 hours away. But in a perfect world, the cops would come by your library about every couple of days, and they'd say hello, and they'd walk through and they'd check the restrooms, and they'd say hi to the staff, and then they leave. And maybe they come back twice in one day and not again for a week, or maybe they come back on Saturday and you know, for just 10 minutes. And what I want the cops to do is be irregular in their visits, but to send a message to the problematic people that you have to guess when the cops are here. And here's the deal. Look at this yellow phrase down at the bottom there. The way you get the cops to show up is not donuts and coffee. That's a cliche. The way you get them to show up is you say, you can use the staff bathroom. And that's what the cops want to hear. They go, what? What? I can use the staff bathroom? Yes. You can go in there and go potty in peace. That's all the cops ever want to do. They just want to go potty in peace, let me tell you. So we may be able to provide them with security incident reports or videos of certain behaviors that they can look at. We also, and this is kind of important, we want to explain the citizen's arrest process to the staff. Somebody touches you in a sexual way. Somebody hits you in a physical way. Somebody steals something from you as a staff member. You have the right to make a citizen's arrest. If the cops did not witness the crime, they can't make an arrest for it if it's a misdemeanor. Most stuff is misdemeanors. But if it is a felony, they can make an arrest. But as a staff member, you have to say, yes, I want to make a citizen's arrest. You don't have to touch the person. You don't have to put on the handcuffs. You just simply sign a form that says, yes, this person did this thing that he's been accused of, or she, and the cops will take him away. Because if you don't, the cops will take this person outside and turn him loose. Let's say they hit you and you don't make a citizen's arrest. The cops are going to take him outside and say, don't come back here, or they're going to write some information down, but they're going to turn him loose. There are no consequences of that behavior. We want people to understand that citizen's arrest by staff enforces consequences. And the biggest thing the staff is concerned about is retaliation. I've not seen any cases of retaliation except once when it involved gang members. But for the most part, most of these cases settle. These people get community service or things like that, and they're not targeting the library or the staff member who did this. And even so, you say to the police, I want to have what's called police privilege, which means use my workplace information, my work telephone number, my work address, not my home information on the police report. If you're not getting good use of the cops, call the watch commander for your particular sheriff or PD and say, can we get somebody who has beat responsibility for this facility to come by on an irregular basis, just come by and say howdy, introduce themselves, and talk about what we might need to have them do on an occasional basis. Okay, next one. Okay, a couple things here before we wrap up. There are two videos that you can look at for workplace violence, and one is called the Run, Hide, Fight video. It's done by the City of Houston, Texas, and the Department of Homeland Security. It's okay. I've shown it, I don't know, 600 times. It has a bad guy, looks like Vin Diesel there with the shotgun. You can skip the first 90 seconds if you want to skip the shotgun part. It's not bloody, it's just loud. But it talks about the run, hide, fight concept, which I believe in. Next one. But the video I really like is done by the Cal State University system, and it's about 8 minutes long, and it touches on the same things that the DHS video does, but it doesn't just much, it's kind of a more empowering way. It's not scary, it's an animation. I think millennial employees like it a lot. Teenagers and students tend to like it a lot. I think you could show it to the staff once a year, and it's empowering. You can show it as a new employee orientation piece. I would show it to your kids, maybe 14, 15 and above at home. I like it a lot. I think it's a better version of the Run, Hide, Fight video. Next one. So we talk about this concept and the rare possibility of an active shooter. We had it in Clovis, New Mexico. We had a shooting in a library parking lot in Sacramento. We've had incidents involving armed people in the library where this is a possibility. We run out of the building taking as many people as we can with us, little kids, elderly, staff, etc. If that's not possible, the next safest things to do is to hide out. Break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, someplace we can store and barricade and lock the doors and keep people out, keep the bad guy out until the police get there. Every cop on the planet is educated on active shooter, and their response is to come and engage with this perpetrator. We want to be out of the building, or if that's not possible, hide out. And the third possibility, fight back, using whatever you have with you, fire extinguisher, pot of hot coffee, etc. Couple things down at the bottom. One is the concept of cover. That stops bullets. That's steel doors. It's concrete walls. It's brick walls. Concealment hides you. That's blinds, curtains, wooden doors. We want to be behind cover if necessary, not standing in front of a wooden door. And the last one, in my perfect library world, we do a drill once a year for active shooter, which would be run, hide, fight. And all we need to do is the run, hide part. Just practice leaving the building for 15 minutes or hiding out inside the building before we open for 15 minutes once a year. Just like a fire drill, we don't need to set the building on fire to do a fire drill, but we want to do these types of drills to remind people of the run, hide, fight concept. Let's practice the run and hide part once a year for 15 minutes. Next one. Just push these out, Mary Beth. A couple things before we wrap up here. I'll take questions. Condition yellow says I'm aware. When I'm around patrons, when I'm off of my break and finish up with my coffee break or back from lunch, I'm standing in front of patrons. I'm in condition yellow, which says I pay attention. Condition white is what just happened, and condition red is protect yourself or get out of there. But condition yellow says when I'm around strangers, I'm around the public, I pay attention. I'm careful with my personal space, not too close. I use careful eye contact. I use handshakes if I think that'll work. I invite them to sit if I think my intuition says it's okay. We change the ratios of confrontation. Think about the code words you use to call the cops. Go get Dr. Green. In California, we used to say call Arnold as in Schwarzenegger, right? Whatever code word you want everybody to remember that says go call the cops. I talked about physical movement, the assertive whisper, especially with kids, especially with loud people. Let's talk over here. Physical movement says, start following my rules. I'm a professional person, come with me. And the assertive whisper says, I'm not gonna match you shout for shout. I'm going to talk, or I'm going to model what I expect from you in terms of how normal human communication. Last one is a demonstration. Please do this with me. Put your hands in prayer position, drop your fingers forward. Okay, with your hands in prayer position, drop your fingers forward. This is called Secret Service hands. When I talk to people that make me feel uncomfortable, I have my hands in this posture. It's also a code word. It says, come help me, colleague or boss, come help me. Secret Service hands, from here, I can protect myself. I can push people away. I can step back. I can do this from this position, but it looks sort of low key. Mary Beth, next one. Why is it called Secret Service hands? Look in the top left over there in the corner. There's the guy in the gray suit, Secret Service hands. Got that? Okay, Mary Beth, next one. If you don't know who the Secret Service agents are in this picture, I have failed you. You can see that they stand this way when dealing with folks. Why? Because it's ready without being in your face. When I'm with people that I feel are confrontational, when I'm dealing with people I feel are threatening or aggressive, I stand in Secret Service hands. I can protect myself from this spot, but it looks kind of key. It doesn't antagonize folks, but it's still protective. And it also says to my colleagues, come help me, come help me. Next one. So what's our kind of takeaways from this? How do we remain vigilant? How do we remain intuitive? And what information do we get from patrons? Hey, there's a guy outside doing this, or there's some kids over here doing that. Their patrons are helpful for our security as well. Updated, visible code of conduct that we can see that's posted on the walls. Our security and policies and procedures are updated, especially around things like active shooter or, these days, pandemic, that type of thing. Firm, fair, consistent, assertive, reasonable treatment of everybody, not focusing on anything other than their behavior. And the biggest key phrase there is what's consistent. The use of security incident reports to tell staff what we need to talk about in staff meetings, or library directors what we need to discuss in terms of leverage with our cities or counties or boards, or what we need to give to the cops. I also do a lot of site security assessments of libraries. You can do this as well. There's a whole cheat sheet for how to do it in my library security book in the appendix, so that you can do an assessment of your own library security and see what you need. And also, how do we improve our relationships with the local cops and the sheriffs, have them come by on an occasional basis. Next one. Just wanted to put up some pictures of my dogs. Mary Beth, back over to you for any questions.
Yes, thank you. Chatterers, do we have any questions in the chat waiting for us? I did put in the chat box a couple of books that you mentioned that we do have in our catalog, so we can place holds on them.
Sure, it's Verbal Judo and The Gift of Fear.
Yes,
yep,
and I think we have the Ryan Dowd one as well, but if not, we'll make sure we get that one.
Right. And he's got some videos on his website, which are good as well.
Yeah, we have posted some of those on our Facebook page as well, some Ryan Dowd ones. I did have one point, I had a question about incidents reports. Even if it's a one-person library, is it still a good idea to keep those incident reports and then share them with the board?
Yeah, I think the issue there is what kind of trends are we looking at? So this happens on a regular basis, this happens irregularly. It's how you make the argument about we need different physical security improvements or camera system, things like that.
Thank you. Do you know of a place that does Narcan training?
What I typically do is send folks to the local public health, the county public health agencies. Oftentimes there are videos. Baltimore is an example of, they have a video training on Narcan. It's not that tough. If you can use nasal spray yourself, you can use Narcan on folks. I know it's a voluntary activity, but I'm a believer in it saves people's lives. So if folks want to volunteer to do it. The other part is I'm a big believer in tourniquets, and I think we need more tourniquets and first aid kits, and we put them in AED machines in libraries as well.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. With teenagers what do we put up with and dismiss, and what do we seek help for or discipline? Teenagers are hard age to relate with.
Yeah, that's a tough one. My biggest thing is what's the impact on the whole library. So if they're being noisy and it's just kind of a regular thing where they calm down later on, no big deal. But if it's chronic problems, if it's involving, you know, theft or violence or that type of thing, I just think there's a lot of limits testing with that population, and you have to kind of figure out what your boundaries are.
And then be consistent with those boundaries.
Absolutely.
Salina Public Library uses Google Forms for their incident report form. It keeps some archives and it's easy for everybody to access them.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, I think one of the conversations too is, do we let staff see the security incident reports? And I think yes, because sometimes you say, well, you know, this happened on a Monday and I was off Monday and I didn't see the incident, so I can look at it really quickly and kind of figure out what happened. If the guy comes in or the lady comes in again, I know what went on when I wasn't there.
The biggest questions came about how to manage dangerous patrons in a solo library setting. And I know a lot of our libraries are also some distance away from the sheriff or other emergency help. So are there other tips you can send us?
Yeah, I think sometimes you may be able to get some help from the state police barracks could be there. There's a volunteer fire department could be in your town. If they have a security company in town that provides security services, can you contract with them to come by on an occasional basis and check in with you? I like the idea of a camera system that also can be monitored at another location. So let's say you're in a large city and you can monitor what's happening 100 miles away in the smaller library by camera. You can see what's going on there. It's a little big brother, but it helps kind of keep track of the staff.
Thank you. And so if there's not that emergency help, is there somebody in your town that could be the one that stops by periodically? Like maybe the mayor can do that, or maybe, you know, like the shopkeeper across the street or somebody. You guys kind of, we're going to team up and we're going to, if I need help, you can call me and I can be right over.
And that's correct. I mean, you know, if your library's in a strip mall and there are folks around you that can step in and watch. And the other thing too is, you know, encourage more community programs. Say, you know, let the Kiwanis Club or the Optimist Club meet in my library if they want to, and just have more people in there on a regular basis. And then the last part is, if you need to leave the building, leave the building. This idea that, you know, I have to go down with the ship is not correct. You need to leave the building, leave the building.
I like the part where you said trust your intuition. If you feel like there's interaction that needs to be done, or if you need to protect yourself, to follow that instinct. Yep,
and it's different for everybody. I mean, some stuff that frightens me doesn't frighten other people, and vice versa.
Cheryl from Plainville says, excellent information and presentation. And Skinny asks, can we use parts of this presentation as a trustee training for our board?
Sure, absolutely. Just take what you need from the slides.
Thank you. Lisa from Lucas says, we call the city guys. So that's also an option. You know, you have the guys that come in and are mowing, they can come over and help as well.
I mean, Public Works can be a good resource there. The guys that are out in the field all the time can come by. And I just think anybody you can create kind of a check on me type of relationship would be useful.
And have their cell phone number on hand. So when you need to make that quick call, if it's, you can do a speed dial or whatever and get a hold of them quickly.
Yep,
so
for sure.
It's about planning and preparation.
Yep.
Any other questions? Steve, yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Given in the wake of the current situation, from your standpoint, do you expect an uptick in confrontational incidents?
All the really cool guys are named Steve, by the way. I think the answer is no, because I think people are grateful that the library is going to be open again. I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that they're going to see you as a resource that they have missed, and they want the library to be back open again. So I think it's going to be better. I think there's also going to be a sense of they'll be more respectful of the library staff, just because of the hardships that they have to go through to get the place, you know, created with new sanitary guidelines and plastic dividers and things like that. You agree, Steve?
To a point, yeah. I'm kind of looking at it from the social and economic aspect. You know, people are going to be hurting, and you're going to see more of these people who don't have anywhere to go to start coming to libraries and using them as quasi shelters. And yeah, I mean, I do see maybe some incidents arising out of that.
Yeah, I think there may be a honeymoon period, a glow period where we get good treatment of the library staff for a while. I'm hopeful that's going to extend.
Yeah, I mean, I'm XLE too, so I've dealt with these guys before.
Sure. It's all about behavior.
Before working in the library, I worked alone on Saturdays at a jewelry store. The business owner across the street used to keep an eye out for unfamiliar cars and would call me to see if I was okay. She would even offer to send one of her employees over just to hang out if she thought someone unfamiliar had stayed too long. It pays to live in a small town and have nosy neighbors sometimes.
Sure. I mean, think of all the resources you have. It could be volunteer fire department, it could be state police, it could be public works like we talked about. There's a lot of resources that may be able to tap into. Just say, you know, you don't have to park in my parking lot, but if you want to sit in here and eat your lunch in the parking lot, that's fine. You know, that type of stuff would be useful on an occasional basis.
I like the idea of the bathroom privileges. I hadn't thought of that one.
That's all cops care about, I'm telling you.
What do we do if someone refuses to use hand sanitizer or masks? Part of my reopening procedure is distancing. Yeah,
I think, you know, the only thing we can do is try to enforce consequences as best you can. I think you say, you know, these are the things that we're asking everybody to do. We're not singling you out, but I think there's going to be a small part of the population who doesn't believe that stuff's useful. And, you know, I'm not sure we can, you know, really tighten up on it without saying, you know, it's a voluntary program or you can't come inside the library, one of the two.
Yeah, we've been saying that because we're a public entity, we can't force them to wear a mask, but we do highly recommend it. I think a good process also is to make sure it's strongly recommended and encouraged, and if they do it, then strongly praised.
Right.
And then clean up and sanitizing afterwards.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, and unless your local ordinance requires that you cannot require a mask among patrons, but you may recommend and highly encourage. All right, I'm going to scroll through. If you have a question and want to chat, you can wave at me or let me know. I will be sharing out the slides today so that everybody can look at those again. And remember that those books are resources that we do have available on Pathfinder.
I usually just ask everybody to, you know, print out the favorite slides that work for you, take some notes, throw them into a file folder, and then look at it, you know, every 3 months or so, and just remind yourself some of the stuff we talked about. You know, I talk quickly. There's a lot of information in a short period of time, but I think some stuff on the slides, you know, can last a long time into your thinking about what kind of changes or tools you want to use.
Yes, and some, it's always good to have that refresher and think of, I like the different types of patrons to kind of know how to categorize them and the tools to help effectively work with them. That was very helpful.
One of the opening lines of the new version of my library security book is, they didn't teach me this stuff in library security in library school. And I get that about every time I do my program. People say, you know, we didn't talk about this in library school. And I said, I know, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, and sometimes when you don't think about it ahead of time, you have to learn on the spot, and that's not when you want to learn this stuff or have your plan come to it. You know, you want to have it thought through before. It may not be the script you thought you were going to follow, but you have at least the guidelines to address the situation.
Especially if you're an introvert, it's tough sometimes. So you want people to be more like you, and they're not.
Yeah, I think like I think. I am not seeing any more questions in the chat. I'm planning to open this up for some discussion about plans you do for your library, some security measures you take, and some tips and tricks you've learned or some questions you have. Thank you, Steve, for joining us today. I really wish this could have been a full morning workshop like we originally planned in person, but this information is very, very useful to our libraries, and I appreciate you working with me and doing the online version.
Thanks to you, and thanks to everybody that tuned in, and also for having the patience through all this time that we talked about this to get on board. I'm happy to do it, and good luck, everybody, and keep in touch.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks. Take care, everybody.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think that this is a lot of. I didn't hear you, Patty. I don't know what you're signaling. I want to thank you all for coming, and I think that a lot of these elements are ones to help us have some guidelines and have some plans. We all know that when the incident happens, you know, you're going to have to fly by the seat of your pants a little bit, but if you have that guideline, it'll really help. If you are on the phone number, when you're done today, send us your phone number so we can make sure that we get you marked down as an attendance. I was going to share with you my biggest security scare that I've had working in the library. I was at St. Mary's, and I was the person in charge. We had several staff members there. It was our biggest branch, and there have been some, I wouldn't call them teenagers like we had here. They were older teens in some early 20s hanging out at the back of the library, and they had started harassing the courier driver. And we'd had the courier driver come in the back door because there weren't any steps, so he could just roll off and go. But that's where the teens were hanging out because low visibility, off from the road. They got into a fight. He came in, he was very upset, and then he started threatening, the courier driver came in, started threatening to come back and shoot the kids. So it was my job to de-escalate the situation. I should have called the cops, but I did not. My concern right then was to calm him down and make sure he didn't come back and shoot anybody. So what we should have had for our staff is a plan that I'm taking the threat away from the patrons and somebody else call the cops. I got the guy to remove himself to an office. I let him talk or rage, and then I calmed him down. But it was very much, I wanted him out of that situation. So I pulled him aside. Well, no, I asked him to join me. I didn't touch him. I asked him to join me in my office. It's a glassed-in place so everybody could see, but it was more separate. I let him talk, and I heard what he was concerned about. He did calm down, and he did leave. But that was kind of a fly by my seat of the pants. I had never thought about what happens when the kids that are hanging out by the back door decide that it'd be fun to mock, harass the older gentleman that's delivering books. So, who has stories to share or tips and tricks about security to share? Or questions, like they think I have a blind spot in my library or behind my library. How can I address this? I see you waving. Oh, yes, T. Simon. I'm gonna unmute you. Just a second. I can't hear you yet. Just a second. Unmute. Try now.
Okay, Therese Swartz from Lebanon.
Hi, Therese.
Okay, hi. Okay, our librarian and I had a very tough confrontation one time with a very angry, foul-mouthed individual who was very angry that we were closing, and he wanted to come in and do some business on his eBay thing and just screamed, ranted, raved, and used language I wouldn't repeat anywhere. And so we remained calm, but there was no one around. The city office, which is right next door, was closed. So even though you supposedly can call someone, sometimes you're just stuck because it's 15 minutes. No, make it almost 20 minutes from the nearest city where there's a police officer. So fortunately, we were able to remain calm, and we just kept talking and then tried to change the subject a little bit and just said, I'm sorry, we're a small library. We cannot be open 40 hours a week. And he was a combination of everything: entitled, rude, demanding, as I say, and we do know he has a criminal record and so on. And so he's known for his temper, but it was kind of a shock. And so I think we decided after that, number one, we did report the incident. We called the sheriff and he had us write a report, and we did email that to him. Next, we decided that our librarian perhaps needs to keep some pepper spray or something around, because but even then, we were outside the door. So and the only other option we would have had was to run back into the library and lock ourselves in. So, I don't know, for what it's worth, that's an experience we had, and that's how we handled it. But as you say, sometimes these events are not scripted. And we were caught completely off guard. He just pulled up and jumped out of the car. There was no, gut feeling. He just literally flew in and screamed, stopped right at the curb, and jumped out and started hollering. So, just want you to know that even though it's a small town of 200 people, it can happen anywhere.
We know that, especially if somebody's really stressed, we don't know what their situation is. If they're stressed, it could cause them to have that outburst. And, we don't have a script, but at least we have some tips, some body language to do, some ideas to help verbal jitsu to de-escalate the situation or to make that decision, and know that it's okay to make that decision that I need to leave this situation, or, we need to do this. There's no perfect formula, but it's scary to think about, but it has to be thought about. You have to have some idea in place to, to at least know and not freeze. I'm not a run or a fight or flight person. I'm a freeze person unless I have some idea of what I can do. I have that freeze, and then I have to.
We kind of had to freeze because, as I say, there was nowhere to go but put that key in the lock and run back in. But meanwhile, our librarian was like in her vehicle. She was just making her way to her vehicle. Yeah,
so kind of like a blindsided with it. It was kind of a blitz attack.
We were truly blindsided. But as I say, it's something that caused us to have a talk about it. It was something like, oh no, this will never happen here. And once it did, we were kind of shocked. But as you say, I was surprised with the temper he has, and he's been known locally as someone who makes a lot of trouble. We really thought that by reporting it to the sheriff, he would really take it out on us. And surprisingly, he did not. He actually apologized to our librarian. His language is rather tough anyway. He apologized to her the following day, and he hasn't been in any trouble since. I'm happy to say that.
So I'm wondering, and I don't know, but Dr. Albrecht was talking about consequences and knowing there's consequences, and maybe that helped him know that I can't act like that here. I don't know.
Well, we gave him a copy of the library hours. Complained about, well, that's ridiculous. You guys have to be open for the public. I'm saying, sir, we can only open 20 hours a week. It's, we don't have the budget for a 40-hour library, blah, blah, and so on. And it took a while, but the next day she gave him an even larger copy of the of the library hours. He wasn't happy, but he finally, settled down. So anyway, it can happen here.
Thank you for sharing that, Therese. Patty, did you have a comment?
Mary Beth, you said something that was really, really interesting to me, and I think it would be good for the libraries who are one people who have board members that are in and out fairly often. But in speaking in, you and I share a wall, and we have very different approaches to very similar situations. And if you're blessed enough to have other staff members, it's a good idea to find out where they're coming from. Sometimes we think we can guess what their behavior might be, but Mary Beth was really honest and says, this is me. And I have been very vocal about how I approach situations. And that helps Mary Beth know, okay, this is what I know I'm going to have to do. This is what I know I'm going to count on her to do. And so think of who that person is that, because it might even be the patron who spends all day in your library. But if it's that person that has become your friend and spends all day, they may be the person that has to help you out of a difficult situation. But because you've created that relationship, that safety relationship, they may actually step up right there. We had a former security guard in the last job that I worked in, and he saw me outside doing my afternoon patrol with my middle schoolers, and he walked up and he said, do I need to take care of something? And I'm like, Phil, no, I'm just fine. But thank you for asking. And just to know that 3:30 every day, Phil was going to come in that door, I knew that. The kids didn't realize it. It was important to me. And it's just, you have so many opportunities. And I would imagine if we went through the room, all 92 or how many ever you are out there right now, would be able to tell a patron story. Even if you're the board member, or if you've been, or if you're a county appointee and you've been in a grocery store or been in a situation where something's happened, everybody has a story. And it's looking at that story in a different way. I had thrown out that I have some other solo library tips. I'll throw those out there on the CKLS Google Groups page. And I'll share my slides for my customer service training if there's anything that you can use there, and answer any questions that you have, because we all have the same problems. It doesn't matter if you're the town of 80 people or if you're a town of 80,000. The same people walking your doors.
Right.
Thank
you.
Yes, Melanie?
I was just going to share, we changed our alarm. I know we're large, but we changed our alarm system. What we were using was really expensive and it wasn't very accurate. We went with Simply Safe. They're $24.99 a month. And sometimes you can get local businesses to help you do that. It was very inexpensive, and they have what are called panic alarms, and they even have them for keychains. So we have them at every service desk, but you can also carry them with you. So what it does is you can have it sound an alarm, which is really obnoxious. We have all of ours on those specifically. They're silent, so the person has no idea, and it goes straight to the police department and they send somebody. I know some places you still have to wait a while, but the nice thing is it doesn't call in to somebody to check to make first. Like, it's automatic and they come here. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case. And if anybody would have any questions or wants to look into it, let me know and I'll share what we did and what we have.
Have you ever had to use that?
Sorry, go ahead, Andy.
Have you ever had to use that system, and what was your experience with it if you did?
We've had it less than a year and we haven't had to use that.
Okay.
We've been able to control the situation, so to speak. But we have had situations in the past that it would have been perfect for.
The name of it was Simply Safe, is that right?
Simply Safe, yes.
Okay. And if you could share that out with the Google group, there's people asking in the chat for that information.
All right.
Thank you. All right, any other questions or discussion?
This is Gail. I just got to hear like Stephen Albrecht's last 5 words. What did you think about the presentation?
We're getting thumbs up in cameras and applause.
Yes.
That's what I'm seeing.
It was really good. And it applies to libraries all sizes. We've implemented a lot of what he said. He did great.
Good. Very good. I'll be sure and watch that recording when it's available.
I am recording it. I will send the recording out. I will send the slides out as well. And I'll send out Steve's contact information in case you have any direct questions.
Oh, awesome.
It says, good, covered a lot of info in a quick time. We'll view the slides as well. Yeah, the slides had so much information on there.
Great.
It went really well. All right, any other questions or comments?
This is Patty. I noticed earlier that Karen from Hoisington mentioned that she keeps a small fire extinguisher underneath her desk because that fire extinguisher is helpful in a fire, but it's also helpful in a difficult situation. It can be used as a weapon. It can also be used, the actual chemical can actually be used as a weapon, or at least a deterrent, because if you aim it at someone's feet, they're gonna at least scoot back. Look at your desk. What do you have at your desk that could be used as a weapon if you need it? You might have a metal trash can. There we go. See, Mary Beth's already pulling out. The metal trash can could be an item that you could throw. You can actually throw books because they're one of the heaviest things that are sitting probably all over your desk. But what do you have that you could use as a weapon if you needed it to at least throw to someone? Oh, look at Gail's guns there. To actually throw at someone, at least for you to get away. And you know, there you go, your coffee.
Coffee.
He keeps a ball bat at his desk.
You usually have letter openers at your desk.
Ooh.
I keep a small ball bat next to my bed because I need some form of protection. And I'm not going to have a gun in my home, but that's not because, it's because I don't know how to use one. But when you think of what are you going to do to protect yourself? And when you leave your building, how do you protect yourself walking to your car? If you're lucky enough to be in a building with more than one person, everybody should be watching you go, even if you're not leaving at the same time. But if you have to be by yourself, like Linda was at Lebanon, what can she do to protect herself on the way out the door?
Yeah, so also sprays. Oh, Therese again. Yes, I see you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Therese from Lebanon. My only, just as going through my mind, if it's a small weapon like a letter opener, which I think is a great idea, I like that. If those types of things require you to get in close, and that would be a little scary, because if it's a really angry person, they can overpower you and take it. But I like the spray thing, that Lysol spray. That's awesome. And throwing the hot coffees.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So thank you.
Wasp repellent and spider spray work really, really well in eyes.
Yeah. Bugs.
Just remember, and when you have chemicals at your desk, you have to remember you have little people who can consume those chemicals that they can get behind your desk. So you got to think of all the parts.
Yes, and oh, I forgot a minute. So it's also good to think about what you can use in your office as a barrier. So you always have your desk might be between you and that person, but if you're up and talking, is there a way to kind of distance yourself and get a barrier in between? Giving that space, that little bit of space sometimes helps. Excuse me. Dr. Albrecht also talked about standing at an angle but making eye contact. So you can't do the direct one too, or they can't to you, but you're at an angle but you're still doing that contact.
That makes less of a target of your physical person.
Yes. And then if you have a barrier or something that you can put in as a barrier. So think of your book carts. Yes, they're rolling, they can push it out of the way, but that's one more second that you have time to get away and get to safety.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Beth, also this is Joy from Central Kansas Library System. Also, there was a comment in the chat from Amy at Otis that they have some security mirrors up which give full visibility from the circulation desk. And if you're a smaller library and don't have them, she says to seriously think about getting some.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she can also see who's coming in while she's reshelving materials.
That's an excellent point. And there, a mirror is going to be less expensive than a security camera system. Think about the blind spots in your library, and think about, can you just move a section of shelves, or do you need a mirror or something so you can see what that blind spot is?
Last December, in our building in Great Bend and CKLS, for our staff holiday party, and this does give you an example of who I am. We had a deputy from the Barton County Sheriff Department come in, and he did a walkthrough of the building and was able to tell us where our security weaknesses are in the building, and there are a lot, but he was also able to offer some advice on how to rearrange things so that we had a better chance at active shooter or any sort of other aggression against library staff and library patrons. And that was a free service, and it was actually really good. And then he answered questions for us as well. And then we really did have a party, but yeah, that was our entertainment.
And I was going to add that those two videos, the Run, Hide, Fight videos that Dr. Albrecht recommended, I will put those links out when I send out the archive video, so you can watch those YouTube videos as well.
I put those on the CKLS Facebook page already.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, here Colleen at Ellsworth said they've taken the Ryan Dowd training and it is really, really good. The board and the staff will be watching it together sometime in the future, and that way they can talk about it. I think that's going to be your best bet to get training from Ryan Dowd. We wanted to bring him to Kansas, but he was just incredibly expensive. So I'm really glad to hear a recommendation from someone that I know.
Yes. Joanna says, if someone looks iffy, I set the can just below the edge of the countertop within reach. But you're trusting your instincts, you're making a plan, and then you can take action if needed. And it's better to be on the safe side and then to put yourself in, or not put yourself, but find yourself in a situation where you're not prepared. Michael?
This is Michael from CKLS. At my previous job, when I was working in a academic library, we had a sheet at the front desk, and every hour we would walk through the library and make sure we saw everyone that was in there. And that way we had a number at the front desk, so we knew how many people were in the library at a given time. And that also helped you be aware of, things that were going on, and to be aware of people that might just be sitting somewhere and not moving.
Some more comments in the chat, but I don't want to miss anybody if you're raising your hand. Tanya from Baroque, yes.
For some of your smaller libraries, or if you don't have a big budget, you can buy online fake cameras that you put batteries in, and they just paste up on the wall, and they're motion censored. So they will move when someone walks by. They will move a little bit so they look like it's a real camera.
Ooh.
Interesting. Thank you. Okay. We have wished for heat sensors because sometimes there are people that have been sitting so long that we forget they're even in the building. I've been surprised by more than one person that suddenly reappeared. Line down training. If there is a blind spot in your library, consider shelving materials in an area where your library is, when your library is empty or locked up. If you have to be in the back corner and you're the only one in your library and you don't feel safe doing that while you're open, think about some alternatives there. Think about if a helpful kid could help you shelve too. Homeland Security will do free training and walkthrough in your library. A bell on your door to alert when somebody comes in or out. That's very helpful. You can get a sample training from Ryan Dowd, and that's how you can see if that's something that's right for your library. And then Melanie in the chat gives a contact for the Homeland Security presentation. Chuck Clanahan, it looks like.
And he's really good. He'll come, he goes to churches, schools, libraries all across the state. And he will even, like, if you want to bring in not only those of your library, you can bring in the police, everybody, and he does an amazing presentation.
Excellent, thank you. And Patty also mentions that a patron count is vital in an emergency situation. Think about tornadoes. If you have to take shelter, you need to know who's coming with you and who's leaving. So
how many bodies there are.
Any other?
No, I just want to pop in quick because I don't want anyone to misunderstand what Michael and the most recent comment about a patron count mean. That doesn't mean that you are having people sign in to use the library on a sheet of paper with their name and their contact information, and then they sign out when they leave. This is an informal tick count, check, there's another person here, that should be destroyed at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you, Gail. So one librarian says that when she works alone and goes to the bathroom, she turns the lights off. So then she can see the front door or knows when somebody's coming in. So it's kind of one of those ideas to how to, do what you need to do, but be safe about it. Clanahan is the name, Chuck Clanahan, and that email is in the chat.
Yeah, sorry, I had a typo.
That's all right, I'm glad you caught it. Any other comments or questions? All right. Pam takes her cell phone and library phone with her wherever she goes in the library, so that's also handy. Okay,